back to the course Producing Effective Policy Briefs. This is Module 2. My name is Renata Serra and I teach at the University of Florida and serve in the management entity for the Feed the Future Innovation Lab for Livestock Systems.
Hello, my name is Pierre-William Blanc and I'm a research assistant for the Feed the Future Innovation Lab for Livestock Systems. Module 2 of this course focuses on understanding the principles of a policy brief validation process, reviewing best practices to implement an effective dissemination strategy, learning the tools to evaluate the impact of the validation dissemination process. By the end of this module, you should be able to effectively validate and disseminate your policy brief to a wider audience. The outline of this module has 3 sections. We will first explain what is policy brief validation, why, when to validate, the steps in the validation process. Then we will explain what is policy brief dissemination, why, when to disseminate, what makes a good dissemination process. Finally, we will share practical evaluation and dissemination tools.
Let's start with policy brief validation. We define policy brief validation as the process of ensuring the policy brief has the conditions required to produce its effect. Research on the effectiveness of policy brief shows that a policy brief is more likely to have an impact when it is aligned with the needs of policymakers. Therefore, why going through a validation process is a simple reason. You, as the researcher, want to make sure that the policy brief addresses relevant problems and provides realistic options for your target audience. When is it a good time to validate the policy brief? It can happen any moment between producing a good draft and finalizing the policy brief. While the process may be lengthy, it can be a worthwhile investment of your time. The validation of your policy brief can occur through any chosen participatory process between your research team and the primary target audience. A validation workshop is the preferred method, but other methods can work too. The main goal for you is to gather participants' feedback on the content of the format, the feasibility of the recommendations, and potential dissemination targets and strategies. So this is the first step, that of gathering feedback. The next step is to review this feedback and analyze it again, possibly in a participatory manner. And finally, is to incorporate it into an improved version of the policy brief. Here we draw lessons from a real example of a policy brief validation workshop that took place in Kampala on November 30th, 2022 for the IDRC-funded project Advancing Women's Participation in the Livestock Vaccine Value Chains in Nepal, Senegal, and Uganda. 3 lessons emerged. First, the important thing was to engage the right stakeholders in the validation process. Who is in the room matters. A successful validation process involves a stakeholder group representing experts who have a stake or interest in the policy. Second, don't involve a crowd in the process. Have a few good participants, maybe just 10, 15 to allow a good discussion. Third, get everyone involved in the process. Don't do all the talk as an organizer. Apply participatory methods to hear stakeholders' voices and obtain constructive feedback.
The next slides cover the topic of policy brief dissemination. Policy brief dissemination can be defined as a process of widely sharing a policy brief and making it accessible to a target audience through multiple communication channels. The main reason for wanting to carefully plan the dissemination of your policy brief is to ensure accessibility and uptake of your policy brief by policymakers. Dissemination is not a one-time activity, but rather an ongoing relationship with your target audience. Therefore, we encourage you to take advantage of every favorable opportunity to get out and reach more of your audience.
This graphic visualizes the main steps of the dissemination process. Select your target audiences, identify your dissemination channels, and improve reach by working with partners. We will now discuss each step in turn. It is important to carefully determine the target audiences for your dissemination. You may want to identify your primary audience. These are the decision makers targeted by your policy recommendations. Next, there may be a secondary audience, which includes interest groups, various government agencies, journalists, civil society, or other organizations that could benefit from your research results and suggestions. To ensure you're able to reach such a diverse set of actors, it is important to consider a varied and inclusive dissemination process with the use of different media forms and communication channels. You may want to identify a specific dissemination channel and strategy for each subgroup within your target audience. As an example, a study on the effectiveness of policy briefs found that the dissemination strategy most appreciated by the policymakers was to send the policy briefs a few weeks in advance of a workshop through individualized emails. Dissemination is more effective when working with different partners to circulate the policy brief for wider reach. These include community influencers, opinion leaders in your professional community, peers at other organizations and agencies, and informal networks.
We end this presentation by pointing out to a number of evaluation tools. The policy brief checklist implemented by the Johns Hopkins Bloomberg School of Public Health is a useful tool that you may want to utilize to critique your policy brief. It contains 5 main sections. Argument flows clearly, content is appropriate for the audience, language is clear, concise, and engaging, data are presented effectively, visual cues are appropriately utilized. As you can see on the second column of the table, for each section, you have several verification points to ensure the effectiveness of your policy briefs.
Consider the following elements to evaluate the reach and effectiveness of your dissemination. An online survey can be administered to your stakeholders and workshop participants to elicit their views on the usefulness of the policy brief. Media coverage can be tracked, number of times your research or messages have been cited in radio, TV, printed press, etc. Take note of the number of times decision makers contact your team for requests of information. You can also monitor the number of downloads and views of your policy brief from the website where it was posted. And finally, you can use Google Analytics to track the citation of your policy brief in other online articles and publications. This concludes Module 2. We hope that you will use the learnings from this module to improve the process of validation and dissemination of your policy brief.
This also marks the end of the course Producing Effective Policy Briefs. To receive your certificate attesting to your course completion, please complete the knowledge assessment at the end of the modules in the UF-IFAS platform.
Thank you for your attention, and best of luck with making your research more relevant and easily accessible within the policy world. Goodbye.